Okay, so here's another clip from my live the other night. I added some stuff to it though, and I read a couple articles that I found at the end that are actually really kind of interesting about the ballistics and the reliability of it and stuff. So it's relevant to what I talk about in this live. Not on mute. I was like, I'm gonna turn it on mute. So no, Alan, I get that the ejection mark's supposed to have specific marks. Probably not as good as being fired, right? Yes, I think that they definitely aren't. There could be some mistakes. It might not be as accurate, might not be as good as at predicting that. I also think there's a possibility that they could have switched the bullet out. You know what I'm saying? And ran it through his gun because, like what I was just explaining before, they're so sure that it's him. It's the only guy, you know what I'm saying? It's the only person. He was there that day. They're like, you know what? We missed this tip. Look, that's him in the bridge. That's what he's wearing. It's got to be him. We don't have anything on him. But they were able to, let's say, they had a bullet between the girls, okay? Because that was there between them, supposedly. I believe that. Say they had the bullet. I mean, they could have even planted that. But here's the thing. They would have gotten that before, way before Alan was arrested. You know what I'm saying? That would have been years before. So no, I think they did get that. I think what could have happened, they go get the warrant, right? They get the gun and it doesn't match. But they're like, just hear me out here. They run the test, shoot, it doesn't match, but they're so freaking sure that's him. So they switch it. Or they just switch it just to be sure anyway. And they just get one out of his gun, eject it out, and do it. It would just be easy. But like I said, do I think that they did it because they think he's innocent? No, I think they probably think he's involved. But that's corrupt. That's corruption either way. For them to plant evidence or, you know what I'm saying, do something a little bit shady, or like if it's just not as accurate, but to say that it's like, no, this is better science than it is. Because I think you will get, I think you'll get different opinions on how good that science is. I think you'll have some people, and I'm sure the defense will probably bring up experts to argue that. Watch, I'm guessing hopefully they'll bring up, because that being their only piece of evidence, I'm guessing, they'll probably try to get experts to argue against that, or get some kind of facts to argue against how that's not, that there could be some, mistakes and it's not as good of science as, to be taken like that's the only evidence. You know what I'm saying? So hopefully they'll get somebody, because you'll have people that argue that it's not. So after I show you and read the documents from this case on the ballistics, I'm going to read you this article that's very interesting, titled "The Field of Firearms Forensics is Flawed." So we'll get to that in a minute. So this is me editing, and I was thinking overnight, only got a couple hours of sleep, but it got me thinking, there's another option though. What if there was no bullet in between the girls? What if that never existed? Because why is this the first we're even hearing about it 7 years later, almost 7 years later when we heard about it? It wasn't in the Ron Logan affidavit, supposedly. I have to look through it again, but that's what I've been told. I haven't looked at that in a minute, so I'm gonna see, just in case. But is there a possibility in that there wasn't even one between them? I mean, I'm learning some shady stuff about McClellan now. We'll get into that some other time, but he's known for planting evidence. So the reason I think maybe there was a bullet there between the girls at the time is because of that one interview that I played for you back in, when was that? Like 2 weeks ago with Julie Melvin. She's talking about how Brad Weber was there that day, right? Remember? He was staying at his mom's house. They were out of town, but he was there that day, and that property is like it's right there. So supposedly he had a Sig Sauer, the same type of gun as the bullet, right? And that's the gun that they took actually and looked at. So if they really didn't find a bullet that matched that gun with that type of gun, then why did, out of all that Weber's guns, I think Brad Weber had a few guns, they only took that one to search and look at. So it does make me think, because that was back then, like they interviewed him, they got a warrant because he was there, it was right in the area, he was home that time, staying at his mom's house, so he's a hunter, he has more than one gun, but they specifically took that gun, the Sig Sauer 40. Now, if we're to believe that all this is accurate, so what does that tell you? Is they probably did have that bullet if this is all accurate, because, why would they specifically only take that gun, right? That's my guess, but who knows? You know, we hear a lot of things with this case, so until we see what's what, it's just one possibility that the bullet never was there and they planted it there afterwards, after they got their eye on Richard and didn't have anything on him. Or they found the bullet, it didn't match Richard's, but then they grabbed one during the warrant and switched it. So yeah, they would have to eject two. They'd have to eject the comparison one and then the original one that they supposedly found between the girls. Or they were just not accurate on the results. That they didn't, that there could be some flaws and there could be some mistakes and it might not actually be from his gun. And then the other possibility that it does match his gun and he is involved in some way. So those are some of the possibilities. Okay, let's get into the rest. Let me continue the video. But like I said, how do we know they didn't plan it? We don't. So anyway, Stephanie, I know all this stuff you're saying, but we don't know how that happened. They could have got his bullet, right? And got one from the gun to have it tested, threw out the other one. Now they have the right one. They could know somebody from the crime. I mean, there could be a million of things of how corrupt it is. Hey, do me a favor. Hey, you know, maybe there's like close enough and they kind of like, I mean, you just never know. You just never know. I'm just saying, if that's all they have, not good enough. And that's why I'm sure why they're saying, no, there's somebody else involved. Because they don't have enough. They don't have like a ton to just only him. They don't have his DNA, obviously, because I think that's what's making him say there's somebody else involved. It's one of the things I feel like, because this DNA does not match like it has to be. So either you got to believe that Richard had a helper, or it was not Richard and it was a couple other people. Because for them to say that in the first hearing, that they think it's two people, that's huge, I think. I mean, they're presenting that in court, making it official. It's not us reading in between lines. It's that, which I don't know. I can't believe I didn't catch that the first time. All right, so let's look at the testing. Those documents are all out now, so let's look at it here. I have those. Let's see. I didn't get to really read them thoroughly, but let's see how thorough they are. So here is some of the information with the gun stuff. So we have Indiana State Police Lab Division. So lab activities were performed 10/14 and 10/19. We have sealed paper bag containing a sealed envelope containing 40 S&W cartridge. The cartridge in item 016 was identified as being cycled in the firearm, and item 314 from Indiana State Police Lab, case number, blah, 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 remarks. Identification. An identification opinion is reached when the evidence exhibits an agreement of class characteristics and a sufficient agreement of individual marks. Sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random, striated, and pressed marks as evidenced by the correspondence of a pattern or combination of patterns of surface contours. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature and based on relevant scientific research and the reporting examiner's training and experience. Read that again, Alan, real quick, because that's not pure science to me, and it's even in the wordings right there. Anything subjective in nature is not objective in nature, and that makes me question things. I'm sorry. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature and based on relevant scientific research and the reporting examiner's training and experience. Microscopic comparison. So, you know, some people might be better at it than others. You know, you got to trust the person, and it's very small differences. And it's subjective. Okay, so I don't like that word subjective for the only piece of evidence that we have. I'm sorry. So that sentence right here is concerning. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature. That phrase right there is very concerning as far as taking it as an exact science. Now, yeah, it should be used as a tool, and it is important. Don't get me wrong. It could be important, but to take that as the only thing they have, listen to that. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature and based on relevant scientific research and the reporting examiner's training and experience. That whole sentence right there, you know, if that is all they have, then no, that's not enough. It's definitely a piece of evidence. You know what I'm saying? It's definitely something, but it can't be all that they have. And maybe they do have more. I mean, they've been so quiet with this case. Maybe they're, they might have a lot more, or at least more. But if this is all that they have, if a trial comes and this is like their main thing that they have, there's no way. There's no freaking way that that's enough to convict a man for murder for the rest of his life. When it wasn't even a fire bullet. It was just ejected. I don't know. It just seems like that if they don't have more, this is not good enough. But maybe they do. I know I keep repeating myself, but maybe they do. Maybe they made some kind of connection to him with them, or maybe there's something more, but I hope, because if not, yeah, there's no way. There's absolutely no way. 80, what up? Did I say hi to you yet? Yeah, exactly. So actually reading these is making me doubt the science behind it even more. Okay, so let's read. There's 2 more documents about it. Let's see. Okay, so description of items. So we got lab item 314, agency item MC8, sealed cardboard box containing 1 Sig Sauer model P226, 40 S&W caliber pistol, serial number, blah, 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 laboratory item sealed manila envelope containing test-fired and cycled ammunition from the firearm. Okay, wait. Is it test-fired. Okay, test-fired. So there's another test-fired cycled ammunition, test-fired cycled. So wait, why would they test-fire it? Wouldn't they want it, the ejection? Test ejection? Eject? You guys help me out, because I'm not good with guns and stuff. So if I'm sounding stupid, I don't know. I want to learn about guns because I want to get one. But to me, when it says test fired, does that mean that it's fired, right? Because we know the other one wasn't fired. So why are they are they comparing it to a fired one? Why would they even do that? Or is that not what it's saying? Because test fired. Wouldn't they just want to do the ejection process to test it? Oh, okay. So it's saying I guess it's just they're being thorough. Maybe it's because it says the firearm in item 314 was examined for functional defects and test fired. Okay. Should have read the ending first. So they're just making sure there's no functional defects of it. So there was no functional defects of the gun, right? All right. Examination of the cartridge in item 315 revealed it to be a 40 S&W caliber cartridge manufactured by or marketed by as Winchester. Examination of the cartridge in item 316 revealed it to be a 40 S&W caliber cartridge manufactured by Blazer. And then the other one's manufacturer. Oh, wait. Examination of 2 magazines in item 317 revealed each to be 40 caliber staggered box magazine manufactured by a marketed Sig Sauer having a capacity of 10 cartridges. So we got an exam of 17 cartridges in item 317 revealed each to be a 40 S&W caliber cartridge manufactured by or marketed by Blazer. Cartridge in item 16, Indiana State Police Lab, blah, 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 was identified as having been cycled in the firearm in item 314. Okay. A test-fired cartridge case from item 314 was entered into the IBIS database. Images of 314 were sent to the National Correlation and Training Center for review. The test fires number 1, 2, and 3 will be returned to the contributor. It is recommended that the test fires are retained for a period of at least 5 years. Oh, okay. Thanks, Patty. But I thought they came to the conclusion that the bullet that they found in between them was not fired. So why wouldn't it seems like the test ones? Why wouldn't they test it with one that was went through the same process? Because so far I'm seeing them only test it with they've only did the fired one so far. Because wouldn't they want to eject one just like how they think the other one was and then test it? But I haven't seen anything of that yet. These all were the fired ones, right? From what I'm reading, the 3 were the fired ones. I just don't understand why they would want to fire it if they're trying to test it, just an ejected one. But let's see, we're not done looking through the documents, so maybe they do. Remarks. Identification opinion is reached when the evidence exhibits an agreement of class characteristics and a sufficient agreement of individual marks. Sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random striated impressed marks as evidenced by the correspondence of a pattern or combination of patterns of surface contours. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature and based on relevant scientific research and the reporting examiner's training and experience. Oh, okay, Maven, thanks. Methodology used to reach results, opinions, interpretations. Physical examination and classification of firearms, function test, barrel and overall length measurement, test firing, ammunition component characterization, microscopic comparison, and NIBIN, which I'm not sure what the NIBIN is. I should look that up. Does anybody know what that is? NIBIN. Sure, it stands for something. Just don't know what it is. Okay. And then here's another one. Motion in Lyman regarding ballistics. Okay. The defendant, Richard M. Allen, respectfully moves the court as follows. He's charged with 2 separate felonies. The prosecution intends to introduce as evidence the following. Okay, so it says, counsel for defendant Allen, upon information and belief, has reasonable cause to believe that the prosecution intends to introduce as evidence the following. Testimony from lab analyst Melissa Oberg and or her agent supporting the findings referenced in Indiana State Police Lab Division Certificate of Analysis attached here to Exhibit A. Testimony from lab analyst Melissa Oberg and her agent supporting the findings referenced in Indiana State Police Lab. Here, let me take this comment down. Sorry, I forgot. I forget to take them down sometimes. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay. Division analysis attached to here, Exhibit B. Bench notes and other literature and information in support of conclusions generated in attached Exhibits A and B. This evidence is inadmissible for the following reasons. So now the defense is trying to say why this testing and evidence is inadmissible. I don't know if I have the ruling on this. Did they... Because this is just their motion, like to present it. Dang, I'm gonna have to find how she rules. Well, let's just read it here. Okay, so they're saying it's inadmissible. A, the items analyzed and the conclusions drawn by the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division are irrelevant and therefore inadmissible under Rule 401 and Rule 402 of the Indiana Rules of Evidence. The probative value of said evidence is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. Furthermore, admission of such information will confuse and mislead the jury, all of which is in violation of 403 Indiana Rules of Evidence. Testimony regarding the analysis and conclusions referenced in Exhibit A and B runs afoul of Rule 702 of the Indiana Rules of Evidence, and that examiner is not qualified to draw the reference conclusions, and in addition, the examiner is not qualified to draw the reference conclusions, and in addition, the examiner's testimony does not rest upon reliable scientific principles. Not sure why what they have to prove that she's not qualified. Such evidence is not necessary for a full and fair determination of the facts of the instant case. So they're going to say either motion letting grant or request the court to order state of Indiana through its prosecutors and its witnesses not to mention, refer to, interrogate concerning, or attempt to convey to the jury in any manner, either directly or indirectly, the existence of any analysis conducted with regard to the items referenced in Exhibits A and B, as well as any conclusions drawn therefrom without first obtaining permission of the court outside the presence of the jury. Further instruct the state of Indiana and its witnesses not to make any references to the fact that this motion has been filed and granted, and to warn the caution of each and every one of their witnesses to strictly follow these same instructions. Order all relief. Bradley Rossi. So I don't know whatever came of that, because I actually went in order and clicked on all of them, and I didn't see any like how she ruled on it. So does anybody know? It might not be as accurate, or maybe it depends, how good the examiner is. Maybe she isn't qualified as for some reason. But I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to read you a couple articles about the science behind firearm forensics. Okay, so this title is The field of firearms forensics is flawed. It's by Scientific American. It says the matching of bullets to guns is subjective. Just like that sentence I was pointing out, that statement in that document. And courts are starting to question it because of testimony from scientific experts. Okay, let me make this a little bit bigger. In 2003, Donald Kennedy, then editor-in-chief of the journal Science, wrote an editorial called Forensic Science Oxymoron. He answered this question in effect, yes. Unfortunately, the answer remains much the same today. Forensic experts continue to employ unproven techniques, and courts continue to accept their testimony largely unchecked. However, courts have recently begun to recognize the scientific limitations of one forensic field. Firearms identification, in which an examiner visually compares fired bullets or cartridge cases and opines on whether the items were fired by the same gun. Contrary to its popular reputation, firearms identification is a field built largely on smoke and mirrors. Firearms examiners suffer from what might be called Sherlock Holmes syndrome. They claim they can match a cartridge case or bullet to a specific gun, and thus solve a case. Science is not on their side, however. Few studies of firearms exist, and those that do indicate that examiners cannot reliably determine whether bullets or cartridges were fired by a particular gun. Firearms identification, like all purportedly scientific proof, must adhere to consistent and evidence-based standards. Fundamental justice requires no less. Absent such standards, the likelihood of convicting the innocent and thus letting the guilty go free is too great. It is perhaps this realization that has led courts to slowly start taking notice and restrict firearm testimony. In the courts, firearms examiners present themselves as experts. Indeed, they do possess the expertise of a practitioner in the application of forensic techniques, much as a physician is a practitioner of medical tools such as drugs or vaccines. But there is a key distinction between this form of expertise and that of a researcher who is professionally trained in experimental design, statistics, and the scientific method, who manipulates inputs and measures outputs to confirm that the techniques are valid. Both forms of expertise have value, but for different purposes. If you need a COVID vaccine, the nurse has the right form of expertise. By contrast, if you want to know whether the vaccine is effective, you don't ask the nurse, you ask the research scientists, who understand how it was created and tested. Unfortunately, courts have rarely heard testimony from classically trained research scientists who could verify claims made by firearms examiners and explain basic principles and methods of science. Only research scientists have the wherewithal to counter the claim of practitioner experts. What are needed are anti-expert experts. Such experts are now appearing more and more in courts across the country, and we count ourselves proudly among this group. Skepticism of firearms identification is not new. A 2009 National Research Council report criticized the firearms identification field as lacking a precisely defined process. Guidelines from the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners allows examiners to declare a match between a bullet or a cartridge case in a particular firearm when the unique surface contours of two tool marks are in sufficient agreement. According to the guidelines, sufficient agreement is the condition in which the comparison exceeds the best agreement demonstrated between tool marks known to have been produced by different tools and is consistent with the agreement demonstrated by tool marks known to have been produced by the same tool. In other words, the criterion for a life-shaping decision is based not on quantitative standards, but on the examiner's subjective experience. A 2016 report by the President Councils of Advisors on Science and Technology echoed the NRC's conclusion that the firearms identification process is circular, and it described the sort of empirical studies required to test the validity of firearms identification. At that time, only one appropriately designed study had been completed, carried out by the Ames Lab of the Department of Energy, colloquially called Ames-I. PCAST concluded that more than a single appropriately designed study was necessary to validate the field of firearm examination, and it called for additional studies to be conducted. The NRC and PCAST reports were attacked vigorously by firearms examiners. Although the reports per se had little impact on judicial rulings, they did inspire additional tests of firearms identification accuracy. These studies report amazingly low error rates, typically around 1% or less, which emboldens examiners to testify that their methodology is nearly infallible. But How the studies arrive at these error rates is dubious, and without experts to explain why these studies are flawed, courts and juries can and have been bamboozled into accepting specious claims. In fieldwork, firearms examiners generally reach one of three categorical conclusions. The bullets are from the same source, called identification, a different source called elimination, or inconclusive, which is used when the examiner feels the quality of the sample is insufficient for identification or elimination. While this "I don't know" category makes sense in fieldwork, the clandestine way it has been treated in validation studies and presented in court is flawed and seriously misleading. The problem arises in regard to how to classify an inconclusive response in the research. Unlike fieldwork, researchers study in firearms identifications in lab settings, create the bullets and cartridge cases to use in their studies. Hence, they know whether comparisons came from the same gun or a different gun. They know ground truth, like a true and false exam. There are only two answers in these research studies. "I don't know" or "inconclusive" is not one of them. Existing studies, however, count inconclusive responses as correct, i.e. not errors, without any explanation or justification. These inconclusive responses have a huge impact on the reported error rates. In the Ames-I study, for example, the researchers reported a false positive error rate of 1%. But here's how they got to that. Of the 2,178 comparisons they made between non-matching cartridges cases, 65% of the comparisons were correctly called eliminations. The other 34% of the comparisons were called inconclusive. But instead of keeping them as their own category, the researchers lumped them in with the eliminations, leaving 1% as what they called their false positive rate. If, however, those inconclusive responses are errors, then the error rate would be 35%. 7 years later, the Ames laboratory conducted another study, known as Ames-II, using the same methodology, and reported false positive error rates for bullet and cartridge case comparisons of less than 1%. However, when calling inconclusive responses as incorrect instead of correct, the overall error rate skyrockets to 52%. The most telling findings came from subsequent phases of the Ames-II study, in which researchers sent the same items back to the same examiner to reevaluate, and then to different examiners to see whether results could be repeated by the same examiner or reproduced by another. The findings were shocking. The same examiner looking at the same bullets a second time reached the same conclusion only 2/3 of the time. Different examiners looking at the same bullets reached the same conclusion less than 1/3 of the time. So much for getting a second opinion. And yet firearms examiners continue to appear in court claiming that studies of firearms identification demonstrate an exceedingly low error rate. The English biologist Thomas Huxley famously said that science is nothing but trained and organized common sense. In most contexts, judges display an uncommon degree of common sense. However, when it comes to translating science for courtroom use, judges need the help of scientists. But this help must come not just in the form of scientific reports and published articles. Scientists are needed in the courtroom, and one way to do this is to serve as an anti-expert expert. David L. Fagman is Chancellor and Dean, and John F. DeGardy Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of California, Hastings College of the Law. Fagman regularly teaches at judicial conferences about the strengths and weaknesses of the forensic specialties and has testified in more than a dozen cases on firearms and other forensic areas of claimed expertise. He was a senior advisor to President Barack Obama's President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, 2016 report. Nicholas Skurick is a professor with a joint appointment in the Department of Psychological Science and the Department of Criminology, Law and Society at the University of California, Irvine. Skurick researches topics in applied decision-making in the assessment of risky and dangerous behavior. He has testified in state and federal courts on firearms identification, as well as other topics at the intersection of science and law. So see, I read these after my live. So this video that you guys just watched before this, the beginning of the video, that was from like 2 days ago, and I just found these articles today. But I feel like I kind of got it right in a way, because first of all, I was talking about that subjective, and It shouldn't be subjective. So they had the same concerns about that subjective being subjective. It should be quantitative, okay, when it comes to pure science, right? And then also, I was talking about the defense will probably, hopefully, at least Rosie and Baldwin would be Richard's best chance of them getting an expert. So basically anti-expert. I didn't realize they were called anti-experts, but I was talking about like an expert to go against this science, if you don't remember me saying that. So I was like, if they really don't let Rosie and Baldwin come back, there's no chance these new lawyers are going to probably get an expert to go against it. Maybe, but like I was saying, Rosie and Baldwin probably will, because especially if this is their only big piece of evidence, and they could have an expert come in and talk about how it's flawed. Yeah, you better believe it. I mean, they should. That would be really smart, right? But this article is basically saying that we need more anti-experts to come in and do this stuff, because, the state will put on this show that, oh, look, this is an expert and this is a science, and look, this must be true what they're saying. It's a fact. Well, there's flaws in it. And if the jury's just hearing this and they're not freaking experts in the field, and they're just hearing this, they're going to trust the expert, right? And so is the judge and everything. So they need their own expert to combat that. So the anti-expert. So yeah. Okay, so what else we got? We got Thomas D. Albright. Holds the Conrad T. Prebys Chair in Vision Research at the Stock Institute for Biological Studies, where he is a professor and a director of the Vision Center Lab. Albright co-chaired the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Eyewitness Identification, served on the National Commission on Forensic Science, and is currently on the Human Factors Committee of the NIST, Organization of Scientific Area Committees for Forensic Science. Okay, so here's another article I want to read. It hits up 4 different kinds of forensics. So this is called The Truth About 4 Common Forensic Methods. This is from Popular Mechanics. So we're just going to skip to the ballistics part, because that's what we're talking about right now. So you see ballistics. Let me make this bigger. Okay, so it says, and I just want to say this. I didn't search like bad science. What I put into the search bar is, I'll show you. How reliable is forensic ballistics? And that's what I'm searching. So this is a pretty neutral statement. I just want to know how reliable it is. So it's not like I'm trying to search for the negative stuff, right? And if you go down, it's all of it saying, not very good. Look, if you just read we just read that one. This one, we're going to probably read this, ballistic evidence. So we'll click on that. But right now, let's do this because we just started this. Right here, look, ballistic evidence not reliable. Studies find less than the 1.2% error rate matching on bullets. And like I said, we'll tap on this. But like I said, that seems like that's not accurate because of that, what they said in that last article, how they found the error rate isn't reliable. I mean, that's not a good way to do it. That's not accurate how they found the error rate. So it really isn't less than 1.2%. Okay, so we'll read that though, because that's the National Institute of Justice, but let me read the one we started. So ballistics. Forensic examiners use the marks left on bullets to match them to specific firearms, but the technique lacks a solid base of research, and errors are common. The technique. The theory behind ballistics analysis is that the manufacturer and use of a firearm produces unique tool marks inside the barrel, which are then transferred to each bullet fired from that gun. Forensic examiners measure bullet size to determine caliber, then click the direction of the rifling markets and the degree of twists to narrow down the gun's manufacturer. To match a specific firearm to a bullet, investigators fire the weapon with a new slug and compare both bullets under a microscope, looking for identical striations. Investigators can also query computer databases that suggest potential matches. The debate. All right. So, the debate. As with fingerprints, not enough research has been done to quantify the probability of error in ballistics matching. So, it's impossible to say with certainty that the marks made on bullets as they are fired are truly unique to an individual gun. Currently, ballistics examiners are aided by computer databases such as the ATF's National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, but lab techs always rely on their own visual inspection to make the final call. The Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners only requires an examiner to find sufficient agreement between the bullets in order to conclude that they came from the same gun. Those judgment calls can cause false results. Last September, the Detroit Police Department's crime lab was shut down after an audit by the state of Michigan found a 10% error rate in ballistics identification. Okay, so that's that, but let's go back. Let's go to that one, National Institute of Justice, or National Institute of Justice, okay? Strength in Science, Advance. So, here is, let me make it bigger. It says, the NIJ defunded study described in study identifies ways to improve ATF ballistic evidence program. Looked at the operation of the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, not at underlying science of firearm and tool mark examination. This forensic science, sometimes referred to by laypeople as ballistics, is concerned with the validity of matching a fired bullet to a particular firearm. So what is the current state of the science of firearm and tool mark examinations? Are these examinations accurate, reliable, and valid? First, the basics. Firearms have numerous metal parts. During the manufacture of a firearm, the machining process leaves unique microscopic markings called tool marks on some of these parts. When most firearms are fired, these tool marks are transferred to the discharged spent cartridge casing and bullets. And remember, that bullet that they found wasn't even fired, so I bet you that even takes down the accuracy, I'm guessing, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so it says this evidence can be collected from the scene of a crime, such as a homicide or shooting, and firearm and tool examiners can compare with a test-fired firearm that, for example, has been confiscated from a suspect. Since 2009, NIJ has funded research to determine the accuracy and reliability of firearm examinations. That is, whether a fired bullet, sometimes referred to as a spent projectile, was ejected from a particular firearm, or the probability of finding unique patterns on casings that are shared by unspent ammunition from the same firearm. NIJ's most recent findings, released in February 2014, established an error rate of less than 1.2% in matching bullets fired from Glock semi-automatic pistols barrels to the actual firearm. The study, a collaboration between a Florida International University statistician, oh my god, why can't I say that? How do you, hold on, I'm going to see how you're freaking supposed to say that. That's tricky, because you go say statistic, so statistician, so hold on, pronunciation, I do my Google pronunciation, okay, let's see.
Statistician.
Okay, oh, statistician, okay, statistician, it's a hard one to say though, guys, try that. In the Miami-Dade Police Department, which has been studying Glock barrels since 1994, was designed to answer two basic questions. Will trained firearm and tool mark examiners look at bullets fired through consecutively, I can't talk today, man. Consecutively manufactured firearm barrels that contain the same barcode like pattern be able to correctly identify the firearm that fired the bullet? What role does an examiner's level of experience play in accurately identifying the firearm that fired an unknown or questioned bullet? Okay, so the experiment looked at bullets from 10 consecutively manufactured Glock barrels. Here's the interesting part. During the manufacturing process, specific Glock barrels are imprinted with a barcode-like pattern called the Enhanced Bullet Identification System, IBIS. The idea behind this study, that even though these barrels were consecutively made and cut with the same IBIS pattern, their signatures or tool marks should still be different. Consecutively manufactured barrels, as the final report states, represent the best possibility for the production of two firearms that could produce non-distinguishable markings, since the same tools and machining processes were used back to back on one barrel after another. 150 test sets with an open set design in which the participants had no expectation that all unknown bullets should match known test sets were sent to 165 firearm and tool mark examiners in 41 states, the District of Columbia, and internationally. This sample was the largest ever used for this type of experiment. Snagulati, PhD, with the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at Florida International University, analyzed the results. The findings. The examiners correctly matched the spent bullet to the barrel that fired at 98.8% of the time. The study also found that examiners with less than 10 years of experience did not reach different conclusions than examiners with more than 10 years of experience. That is, there was no significant difference between these two groups in their ability to correctly identify which bullets were fired from which consecutively manufactured Glock barrels. So, but remember, look what we're looking at. What is this called? Yeah, the National Institute of Justice. It could be biased. I mean, I know you could look at that with anything, like the other ones that made it seem unreliable could be biased. I get it, but you gotta look who it's coming from. You know, we just read an article that says something kind of different than this, right? Like I said, that's why you just gotta do your research and then you make your own conclusions. I would say most of these though are saying they're not. It's not as reliable as you would think. It's not like an exact science. That doesn't surprise me that one is showing positive with that. But let's see. This is another one, OklahomaCriminalDefense.com. I'm sure that's going to be for it, but we'll look at that in a minute. But let's just look at another thing real quick. It's more neutral right here. Look, this is ballistic evidence not reliable. Maryland Supreme Court says the DNA of a gun used to convict the DC snipers and hundreds of others doesn't meet scientific standards, judge rules. If you're a fan of crime shows like CSI, or if you remember the DC sniper case, then it's a good bet you know about ballistics evidence. This week, Maryland's highest court ruled that ballistics evidence is not supported by science in a ruling that will sharply restrict how ballistics may be used in Maryland courts in the future. The decision is a stunning turn for a forensic method that took center stage in the case against the DC snipers John Muhammad and Lee Malvo. A big part of the case against them was a microscopic analysis of bullets and fragments that examiners said proved that a Bushmaster semi-auto assault rifle they had in Muhammad's possession fired the shots that killed 17, wounded 10, and terrorized the region in the fall of 2002. But such science is flawed, according to Jeffrey Gillerin, chief of the forensic division at the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. There was a study called Ames 2, and what that study found that when they tried to reproduce the opinions of one examiner versus another examiner, they found that over 50% of the time, the second examiner came to a different conclusion on the same evidence than the first examiner, Gillerin explained. Reproducibility is a basic science 101 and a requirement for a valid scientific method. This particular method simply is not reproducible, and that's a big problem. Gillerin said the decision will impact hundreds of cases in Maryland per year. He explained that ballistics evidence can still be used to narrow down what category, brand, or model of gun may have been used in a crime, but it can't be used anymore to pin a shooting on one specific gun. Attorney Stanley Reed, who is on the team that appealed the 2012 conviction of a Prince George's County man, resulted in the appeals decision bursting the bubble, and ballistics evidence said the case will have an impact in courts throughout the nation. I think it's going to resonate all over the United States. This is the most thorough, comprehensive look at the issues surrounding firearms toolmark technology of any court in the country, Reed added. A national firearms forensic expert says the ruling should be a wake-up call to law enforcement. There is no national standard, said Stephen Howard, an attorney, gunsmith, and forensic expert who testifies in cases nationwide. There needs to be a set of guidelines that says you must have A, B, C, D to get F, the felony. Howard said microscopic tool marks on ammunition casing and rifling remnants on bullets can be pinpoint accurate, but too often prosecutors and examiners make claims in court when there are not enough marks, or the exact type of marks needed to be sure. The association representing firearms examiners issued a statement saying the Maryland Supreme Court got it wrong. The ruling is inconsistent with the research that has been conducted over many decades. The statement from the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners said, the association said the Maryland ruling provided no guidance on what would meet the standard for acceptable ballistics evidence, which would have the effect of usurping the role of jurors in the legal system. This also establishes an expectation that trial judges will need to become amateur scientists, the examiner's statement said. Maryland police say the agency will keep on doing ballistics analysis to solve crimes. The Maryland State Police Forensic Science Division will continue testing firearms and toolmarks casework using our current analytical methods, the agency said in a statement. Changes are anticipated in how conclusions based on results of the analysis are reported and testified in court. Maryland State Police reported that its Forensic Science Divisions completed 1,806 firearms and toolmark cases in 2022. So actually, hold on, one more. Let's just look at that one, the criminal. So this is reliability of ballistic evidence. I won't read it all, but let's just see what their conclusion is. It says, in recent, we have looked at a forensic evidence presented at trial and how, though many jurors feel science is infallible, these type of evidence are sometimes far from solid. In some cases, the evidence presented as indisputable fact later become discredited as junk science when it becomes apparent just how flawed the theories behind the science can be. So let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Recently, we looked at fingerprint evidence to explore the limitations of using fingerprint analysis to determine a specific person's involvement in a crime. Today, we look at ballistics evidence. Rifling is grooves. They look at when the bullet's fired, it leaves rifling marks as it passes through the barrel, used to identify the gun. Okay, so the validity of the fundamental assumptions of uniqueness and reproducibility of firearms related to tool marks has not yet fully been demonstrated. Now, this is interesting. This is kind of maybe the future of ballistics. Check this out. This will be my last. This could be a good thing. So this is from January 2023, this article. What is microstamping and can it help solve shootings? Laws to expand the technology's use have passed in 3 states and the District of Columbia, but some are questioning its effectiveness. When law enforcement investigates a shooting, the evidence left at the scene can make or break a case. So let me skip some of this. Says, first things first, what is microstamping technology? Microstamping uses lasers to engrave alphanumeric and geometric codes on a gun's firing pin, the piece of hard metal that strikes an ammunition cartridge's primer and makes it fire. When a firing pin is microstamped, it imprints its unique code on the cartridge. This code is tiny, but when viewed under a microscope, provides a unique identifier that can link a spent casing to a gun. To be clear, microstamping deals with the cartridge casings that hold bullets before they're fired, not the actual bullets. In most models of guns, the casings are ejected after they're fired. Microstamping provides order to a process that already happens when a gun fires. Standard firing pins leave their own patterns, known as tool marks, on spent casings. But connecting markings on spent casings to the gun that fired them requires access to the weapon itself. All you're doing in microstamping is organizing those in a way that's easily recognizable, said Joshua Horwitz, co-director of Johns Hopkins University Center for Gun Violence Solutions. So instead of having random tool marks, you're organizing tool marks in a way that gives you letters, numbers, and geometric coding. Todd Lizzo and Orest Ohar, engineers with experience in laser technology, developed the early microstamping technology more than 2 decades ago. Their company Tech Labs develops machines that can mass produce engraved firing pins, as well as software to generate, handle, and read the resulting codes. Lizzo and Ohar relinquished their patent rights to the core technology in 2013 in the hopes that gun manufacturers would use it. How could it help solve crimes? The backbone of investigating gun crimes is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives tracing program. Using a gun's unique serial number, investigators can identify where a firearm was first sold and to whom. But with current methods, investigators need the physical firearm and access to its serial number to initiate a trace. Proponents see promise in microstamping because it allows investigators to use the microstamp codes to identify a gun used in a shooting without recovering it. It's pretty cool, huh? The hope ultimately is to solve more gun crimes, which police struggle to do. In 2020, the national murder clearance rate, or the share of cases that result in an arrest or are closed for other reasons, fell to 51%. It's the lowest point in 50 years, according to CBS News analysis of FBI data. That figure is even worse for non-fatal shootings. Supporters also hope the technology could help law enforcement solve more gun crimes without increasing surveillance in the disproportionately black neighborhoods where shootings are most common. It really could help laser focus on the weapon and the chain of custody for that weapon rather than an entire neighborhood, said Cami Chavez, a professor of criminal justice at William and Mary Law School and a former prosecutor. It could also deter crime because you know that the weapon you have, when it fires, it's going to leave this microstamp mark. And it says, does any states require microstamping? It's complicated. In 2007, California passed a law requiring gun manufacturers to include microstamping capabilities in all new models of handguns introduced in the state. But the law has had little impact since it was signed. Gun manufacturers and pro-gun groups have fought the law in court and continued selling new manufacturers of existing models instead of introducing new ones. Amid California's struggles to fully implement its microstamping law, the District of Columbia passed a microstamping law in 2009. But after that, interest in the technology cooled for more than a decade. That is until New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed a microstamping law in June 2022, as the state responded to the Supreme Court's decision in Bruin. The law requires the State Division of Criminal Justice Services to examine the technological viability of microstamping. If the technology is deemed viable, new semi-automatic pistols sold in New York will eventually need to be capable of microstamping. But it's still, it's gonna have flaws probably too, I don't know, I haven't really thought that out of what they would be, but it would be better than what they have now, though, the system. And if they could just keep improving, I think they could get to a point where it's actually, you get more quantitative results instead of subjective. Can the codes be altered? Let's see. So some people, like the National Rifle Association, a few groups are saying that technology is a waste of time because the engraved firing pin can be defaced or removed, as demonstrated in Krivosta's 2006 study, which found that engravings could be removed with a common sharpening stone. It says, but defacing the firing pin engraving would be an involved process. Lazo and other proponents of microstamping say it would require taking apart the firearm, removing the firing pin, and shaving its tip enough to remove the engravings, but not enough to render a gun inoperable. It would be easier to replace the firing pin altogether, as the parts are inexpensive, largely unregulated, and don't require a background check to purchase. Methods aside, some subset of people determined to make their firearm untraceable may attempt to do so, and they already do, by removing or defacing their gun serial number. But existing research suggests most people accused of committing violence don't take this step. A 2015 study by Duke University found that among guns taken from alleged gang members, only 5.4% had defaced serial numbers. Can you be framed? Of course, you could stock up on spent casings at a gun range and then use them at a scene of a shooting to throw investigators off your trail. But they would have to go to a gun range or gather, spent bullets. So, yeah. It says the tactic also probably wouldn't be successful. The shooter would need to plant cartridges of the same make and model. The cartridges would also need to be fired through around the same time because casing oxidized with age. On top of that, the shooter would need to be sure that they didn't leave fingerprints or DNA on the spent casings and that they were swapped out for their own casings before first responders arrived. This type of tampering is possible with or without mic. Alright guys, what do you guys think of the articles? Let's just kind of like skim through the rest. So this one says, I'm not going to read anymore, but we'll kind of just see what reliable. Let's see what the conclusion is. There's too much variability. The National Academy of Sciences says in 2009, too much variability among weapons to determine how many points must match. Do you have a matter with which you are lawyers? No. But anyway, how many points must match in order to achieve a given level of confidence in a result? And that more studies are needed to solidify this type of evidence in order to achieve reliability. So no, that's not looking good as far as it's a tool, like I was saying before on the live a couple days ago. It's definitely a tool that can help, but it can't be used as like a science, as like a for sure thing. And then that's tricky because think about it, in court, the jury's not going to know to do like research on this stuff to know that it's not reliable. They're going to hear this expert and the state's going to convince and tell their story like, oh, this is solid evidence, and then they're going to hear that and then they're going to think, whoa, this is science, so of course that has to be. I mean, if that's the bullet, yeah, the ballistics, yeah, that's a science, so it has to be right. They're probably going to think, yeah, look at it like, no, it's like like DNA and stuff. And that could be dangerous because they're not given the research on the unreliability of it and stuff. So that doesn't seem right. And then I think it makes sense why Richard's attorneys were asking to get that taken off, how do they word it? I can't even think of the word now. But making it inadmissible basically, so they can't talk about it. So I understand because unless if they could get an anti-expert, but it's still going to be pretty powerful, especially if that's their only evidence, I feel like. But I guess the defense does have a choice to get one of those anti-experts to talk about the unreliableness of it. So that, yeah, I mean, that's an option, I guess. But sometimes they might not be able to get experts. It might be expensive. If it's a public defender, they might not be able to find one to be able to testify, and then therefore one side is promoting it or showing it like it's facts, and there's a lot of stuff that it's subjective, basically. So, all right, guys, I'm gonna end this here. Thank you. Have a good night. I'm trying to think if I think I might have a couple more clips from the live. So basically, for most of them, I'm at least adding new stuff into it too, like these articles and extra comments. So even if you did see the live a couple days ago, I would check out the videos, because I'll probably add at least some stuff into the clips. Bye.